The grand synoptic hall of Pylos Prime was not built for comfort or aesthetic admiration, but for the chilling, necessary convergence of power and apprehension. Its ceiling stretched into an impossible, simulated void, pinpricked by synthetic stellar clusters that mimicked the exact gravitational geometry of the known constellations. Yet the light emitted was perpetually muted, absorbing the anxious flicker of the gathered delegates. 7 species occupied the tiered observation platforms, their physiologies diverse, calcified exoskeletons clicking with nervous regularity, fluidic beings shifting in low-gravity suspension tanks, and the dominant Xylos hegemony, slender, six-limbed bipeds, whose scales shimmered a deep, unsettling obsidian under the minimal illumination. Ambassador Thrix, the designated voice of the constellation, rested his lower pair of limbs against the cold, polished basalt of the central plinth, his multifaceted eyes fixed upon the churning holographic projection dominating the chamber floor. This projection was not a map of stars, but a chaotic, violently colored depiction of anomalous energy propagation. It was the visual representation of impossibility. For 3 cycles, the constellation had debated the trajectory of the newly designated entity, the human exploratory vessel. Humanity itself was an ongoing, deeply unsettling dossier, a species that had achieved interstellar capability rapidly, bypassing several fundamental steps of thermodynamic and kinematic development, characterized by internal cultural dissonance, yet possessing a unified, terrifying external resilience. The Xylos hegemony had filed them under the category of unstable variables, too primitive in their social structures to be an immediate threat, but too kinetic in their technological advancement to be ignored. Yet, this particular vessel, designation **Ghostkin**, applied by the bewildered sensor arrays, was rewriting every assumption made about their capabilities. It had crossed the formalized interdict boundary of the constellation, a perimeter spanning parsecs, not through conventional jump physics, nor through the established, recognizable folding methods utilized by the Xylos, but by simply being somewhere else instantaneously. The sensor arrays, built on the bedrock of relativistic causality, registered the arrival as a non-event, a temporal null shift that left behind residual energy signatures so pristine and potent they fractured the predictive models. "It is not a vessel," declared General Vorn, a Xylos military leader whose voice resonated with the aggressive tenor expected of his rank, his massive command spurs catching the dim light. "It is a deliberate act of contempt. We observe no detectable kinetic signature, no displacement field, no engine harmonics that conform to the known universe. This is a probe, an advanced drone deployed to test our resolve. Our fleets are positioned, Ambassador. We advocate for immediate, non-negotiable containment and analysis through calibrated pulse fire. To allow this transgression unpunished is to invite further exponential incursions." Thrix slowly articulated his 4 primary limbs, a gesture of profound disagreement bordering on offense. "General Vorn, your reliance upon kinetic metrics remains the flaw in your assessment. Observe the spectral analysis." He directed a mental command, and the turbulent hollow projection shifted. Where before there was merely energy overload, now highly filtered data displayed the subtle distortion of local spacetime around the intrusive object. "Look at the causality signature. It is smooth. Seamless, there is no violence in its transition. Our models indicate that anything achieving such a transit speed would generate gravitational turbulence sufficient to destabilize a minor system, yet the only turbulence registered is the asterisk shock of the sensors attempting to reconcile the position shift. Furthermore, there are no detectable defensive matrices utilizing particle fields or hard light projection. It is, by all observable standards, completely undefended." A representative from the Sarn race, a low-slung, highly logical species whose consciousness operated on parallel computation, issued a rapid series of clicks and whistles interpreted by the universal translator as a question delivered with clinical dread. "Ambassador Thrix, if it operates with such undetectable subtlety, if it bypasses the fundamental physics we utilize for detection, how are we certain it is even the human vessel we catalog? Perhaps this is a third-party entity entirely, utilizing the rudimentary human presence as a mask for a far more complex penetration." "A necessary contemplation," Thrix acknowledged, his eyes narrowing, "but the residual chronometric data aligns precisely with the theoretical temporal decay associated with human translight signatures recorded during their expansion phase. This vessel is human. It is merely advanced far beyond any." projection we derive from their observed political and resource structures. The data suggests an allocation of resources, physical, intellectual, and material, dedicated not merely to faster travel, but to a fundamental mastery of travel. It is a ship that exists less in space and more in the geometry of possibility. This is why we designated it Ghostkin asterisk. It is not of the visible horizon. The sheer weight of this revelation settled heavily in the synoptic hall. The Xylos and the associated constellation species prided themselves on their ancient, stable grasp of physics, viewing the younger species as merely crude tinkerers. The implication that humanity, the species known for their turbulent, self-destructive impulses, had transcended these constraints, developing a vessel that mocked established relativistic principles, suggested a fundamental, terrifying miscalculation. The asterisk resolution is prepared for intercept, Threeks announced, shifting the focus back to the immediate, dangerous protocol. The asterisk resolution was the constellation's foremost vessel of diplomatic engagement, heavily armored, equipped with the most sophisticated shielding technology, and capable of generating inhibitory fields strong enough to dampen the core energy output of typical warships. We will approach with extreme caution, broadcasting the full constellation protocol of first contact, demanding immediate compliance and cessation of movement. If the vessel responds with aggression or utilizes any exotic weaponry, General Vorn, your fleets are authorized to isolate the region and utilize standard containment procedures, prioritizing the preservation of the vessel's structure for analysis. Vorn shifted, his metallic plating scraping against the floor. And if it ignores the protocol, Ambassador, if this human ghostkin simply decides to perform another impossible leap into the heart of our sovereign space, then we shall confirm the hypothesis, Threeks stated, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet amplified to fill the chamber with resonant authority. That we are dealing with a power that views our physics not as limits but as minor inconveniences, and that we have gravely, perhaps fatally, underestimated the depth of their focus. The very structure of this ship suggests a profound shift in their civilization's intent. We must understand that intent before we risk an engagement that could shatter the fragile equilibrium of this entire galactic arm. This ship, the one that looks like something pulled from the deepest, most radiant future, the neon horizon, demands not conflict, but a paralyzing caution. The transition from the calculated tension of the synoptic hall to the cold, stark reality of the deep void was abrupt for Commodore Jarn. He stood on the bridge of the asterisk resolution asterisk, the vessel gliding silently through the periphery of a dust nebula, approaching the predicted location of the human anomaly. Jarn was a veteran of the long, cold peace, trained to handle calculated risks and quantifiable threats. The Ghostkin asterisk defied quantification. His lead sensor officer, a small, highly specialized engineer named Keth, whose visual receptors were augmented to perceive hyperspectral data, repeatedly cycled the active scans. Commodore, all standard sensor matrices are still reading null. The chronometric decay signature remains, indicating its presence, but we cannot lock a material target. It is a ghost in the machine of space itself. Switch to passive gravitational inference, Jarn commanded, his internal stress meter, a feature unique to the Xylo's nervous system, showing a dangerous spike. If it has mass, it must exert gravity. Look for the distortion of background radiation. Keth complied, and after a period of agonizing silence, a faint, impossible outline began to coalesce on the main tactical display. It wasn't the jagged, armored profile expected of a warship. It was a structure of breathtaking, unsettling elegance. It was vast, dwarfing the asterisk resolution asterisk, yet its mass signature was incredibly low, suggesting an internal energy source that negated gravitational pull or perhaps utilized exotic matter unknown to the constellation. It was long, slender, almost crystalline, refracting the distant starlight not into harsh points, but into long, shimmering sheets of pure, vibrant color, not the dull spectrum of a typical ship, but the incandescent, deep reds, startling magentas, and electric blues that Threeks had called the neon horizon. Analysis of hull composition? Jarn asked, his voice steady despite the internal tremor. Inconclusive, Commodore. The material appears to be a composite of metallic hydrogen stabilized under ambient conditions, interleaved with lattices of what we identify as crystallized spacetime harmonics. It is absorbing incident energy, not reflecting it. It has no discernible edges. It is perfectly smooth. Keth paused, the digital whine of his diagnostic tools suddenly stopping. Wait, we have a signature lock. Active power generation 0. Auxiliary power, 0. Propulsion output, 0. It is completely inert, Commodore, just sitting there. This was worse than aggression. Aggression implied recognizable intent. Inertia, when accompanied by such profound, baffling technology, implied either supreme confidence or total ignorance of the danger. Jarn initiated the first contact protocol. The message was transmitted across all constellation channels, synthesized into the 8,000 known galactic languages, including the current, heavily debated iteration of human language. This is the diplomatic vessel * resolution of the galactic constellation of known sentience. You have violated sovereign interdict space. Identify yourselves, cease all movement, and prepare for diplomatic engagement. Failure to comply will be interpreted as an act of hostility. Silence stretched for 4 standard minutes. Jarn felt the pressure building. The eyes of the constellation were focused on this engagement. Then a response. It wasn't a crackle of static or a coded frequency burst. It was a clean, perfect quantum entanglement communication, arriving as if it had always been there, resonating directly within the resolution s primary command node, bypassing all firewalls and reception filters. It was a voice, synthesized but deeply, perfectly human, carrying an astonishing clarity and lack of urgency. "This is the Ethelred *," the voice began, calmly and without preamble. The naming convention was noted immediately, a reference to a mythical, ancient human concept of noble counsel. "We acknowledge the Constellation Protocol and your demand for identification. We are aware of the interdict boundary you perceive. We did not violate it. We simply navigated around the constraints that define it. We are the designated vessel of the human consensus of applied physics and ethics, dispatched for purposes that require precise spatial placement." Jarn leaned forward, the raw data transcript scrolling across his command panel. "Identify your purpose, Ethelred *. Your presence is destabilizing the regional kinetic equilibrium. State your intent for entering the constellation's established space." There was a subtle, almost philosophical pause from the human side, a delay that implied not confusion but deep consideration of the appropriate linguistic frame. "Our purpose is observational and preparatory," the human voice, now introducing itself as Envoy Kalen, responded. "Our intent is singular, to establish a stabilized null field across this parsec range. This is a purely defensive action designed to mitigate a predictable, cyclical entropic anomaly that will affect all sapient life in this quadrant within the next 5 standard rotations." A hush fell over the resolution s bridge crew. The language was not that of diplomacy or even military maneuvering. It was the language of cosmic responsibility. Jarn pressed the point, his professional skepticism warring with a growing sense of awe. "A null field. We have no record of humanity possessing the theoretical framework, much less the material capability, to construct large-scale field generators capable of mitigating entropic anomalies. What are the material requirements for this null field?" "The null field requires no external material input," Envoy Kalen replied. "It requires a localized manipulation of the Planck length, utilizing the internal resonance harmonics of the Ethelred itself as the anchoring node. The field is not a projected wall, it is a stabilized absence of destructive causality." The constellation's understanding of physics had just been reduced to kindergarten lessons. The Xylos spent millennia perfecting shielding that deflected energy. The humans, in a ship that looked like a dream of light, claimed to be able to stabilize causality itself. "Envoy Kalen," Jarn stated, adopting a tone of stern skepticism mandated by protocol. "Your claims are extraordinary and lack verification. The constellation cannot permit such a large-scale, unmonitored deployment of exotic energy. We demand that you submit the Ethelred for immediate and complete diagnostic assessment, allowing our engineering teams to confirm the safety and intent of your technological capacity." "We understand your apprehension, Commodore," Kalen stated smoothly, the tone utterly devoid of annoyance, carrying instead a faint resonance of disappointment. "However, the internal complexity of the Ethelred is such that even a cursory diagnostic engagement with your current sensor technology would likely destabilize the processing architecture of your vessel. We are not designed to be observed by instruments that rely upon classical principles of measurement." Jarn felt a cold dread solidify in his core. It was not arrogance. It was a simple, ethical statement of fact. The Ethelred was so far advanced that mere proximity threatened the * resolution. "Your lack of completion necessitates military action," Jarn warned, though his throat felt tight. "Our fleet assets are standing by. we possess the capability to utilize inhibitory fields designed to temporarily negate your primary operational capacity. For the first time, a subtle shift occurred in the communication channel. Kalen's voice remained calm, but a deeper, almost musical undercurrent entered the synthetic tone. Commodore Jarn, we have meticulously monitored the internal debate within the Synoptic Hall for the past cycles. We understand the assumptions being made regarding our intent and capability. Allow me to offer an ethical clarification regarding the defensive posture of the Ethelred asterisk. Jarn waited, anticipating a threat, a flash of weapons signatures, a demonstration of kinetic power that would shatter the asterisk resolution. The Ethelred is not equipped with traditional kinetic or energy projection weaponry, Kalen continued. The philosophy of the human consensus regarding galactic engagement shifted drastically upon the realization of the full power potential available through fundamental physics manipulation. Why expend energy deflecting a threat when one can simply ensure the threat never possesses the requisite temporal sequence to materialize? Kalen paused, letting the conceptual weight of the statement settle. If your fleet were to engage us, if you launched any form of kinetic projectile or energy beam, the Ethelred would not utilize a shield. Instead, our systems would detect the intended path of the incoming action, analyze the moment of its genesis on your vessel, and introduce a minor, localized temporal dissonance into that specific region of spacetime immediately surrounding the projected attack vector. The projectile would still be launched, Commodore, but the instant of its launch would be slightly, infinitesimally delayed relative to the surrounding reality. From the external perspective, the weapon would simply fail to arrive. It would propagate only within a causal bubble, effectively making the event of the attack irrelevant to the structural integrity of the Ethelred asterisk. The statement was delivered with the precision of a geological report, describing a mundane natural phenomenon. Yet it spoke of power that manipulated time and space on a microlevel, rendering all conventional warfare obsolete. This was not a weapon. It was a statement of sovereignty over the laws of physics. We have no desire to utilize this capacity, Kalen concluded. Our mandate is peace, and our current operation is entirely focused on the safety of your constellation, even those who currently perceive us as the threat. We urge you to consult with Ambassador Threeks and General Vorn. Relay the explanation of the null field mechanics. We will maintain stasis at this location for a period of 10 standard hours, allowing for diplomatic deliberation. The communication ceased, returning the void to a tense, suffocating silence. Jarn stared at the translucent, glowing form of the Ethelred asterisk, the ship of the neon horizon, sitting motionless, its very existence an indictment of the constellation's ancient, rigid understanding of reality. Back in the Synoptic Hall, the projected data had transformed from chaotic noise into a frightening, perfect clarity. The constellation delegates absorbed the transcript of the communication with a profound, terrifying silence. General Vorn's initial aggressive posture had collapsed. He stood rigid, the tips of his primary limbs trembling slightly. Threeks, however, found a strange, intellectual calm settling over him. He had anticipated advanced technology, but not ethical asterisk technology of this scale. The human envoy Kalen had not just revealed a technological advantage. They had revealed a philosophical maturity that contradicted every historical record the constellation possessed about the chaotic species. They claim not merely the ability to defend themselves, but the ability to enforce non-existence upon an attack, Threeks articulated slowly, addressing the assembly. This is not a development based on resource acquisition or military superiority. This requires a civilization that has dedicated its highest minds to understanding the fundamental nature of the cosmos, bypassing the interim stages of crude energy projection that preoccupied us for millennia. The Sarn representative whistled its assent. The implication is staggering. Their technological progression leaped beyond necessity. They developed the means to achieve temporal distortion simply because they could, not because they needed to fight a war. Vorn finally found his voice, laced with bitter professional despair. If this is true, Ambassador, then our entire strategic defense structure is obsolete. Every ship, every shield generator, every kinetic railgun, all rendered functionally irrelevant by the manipulation of causality at the point of action. We cannot fight something that chooses which reality it occupies. Precisely, Threeks confirmed, the gravity in his voice absolute. And yet observe the intent. They did not initiate the transit deep within our territory. They stopped precisely at the fringe. They communicated immediately. They offered an explanation, albeit one that defies our current comprehension. They defined their defense in terms of asterisk prevention asterisk, not destruction. Threeks initiated a full-spectrum, constellation-wide diplomatic session, linking directly with the asterisk resolution and Envoy Kalen. Envoy Kalen, Threeks began, his image projected onto the Ethelred *S presumed bridge, where he could perceive only a vast, softly illuminated space, devoid of visible instrumentation, implying direct neural interface or ambient control. We have considered your claims regarding the null field and the defensive capacities of the Ethelred asterisk. We find the claims regarding temporal manipulation conceptually destabilizing, yet consistent with the impossibility of your vessel's arrival. We appreciate the intellectual honesty, Ambassador Threeks, Kalen responded, his voice still perfectly level, seemingly unconcerned by the diplomatic pressure. We must move past the concept of defensive capacity, Threeks continued, shifting the focus to the promised threat. You claim the establishment of this null field is preparation for a predictable cyclical entropic anomaly. This is not a concept known or charted by the constellation's primary astronomical survey. Explain the nature of this anomaly and why humanity would deploy resources of this magnitude, a vessel that represents an entirely new epoch of technology, for the protection of species that currently view you with suspicion. The philosophical core of the entire interaction now rested upon this question. Why would an exponentially powerful, newly revealed civilization choose guardianship over dominance? Envoy Kalen's expression, projected in high resolution, shifted subtly, a minor tightening around the eyes that suggested immense seriousness. Ambassador, the Xylo's hegemony is ancient, and your civilization has prioritized stability and the avoidance of rapid change. This allowed you to weather many localized conflicts and achieve tremendous longevity. However, in prioritizing stability, you neglected the examination of the true deep history of the cosmos, the history before light. The cyclical anomaly we refer to is not electromagnetic or gravitational in nature. It is organizational asterisk. Threeks urged him to elaborate. Organizational? Imagine, Kalen began, delivering the complex physics through simple metaphor, the entire galactic superstructure as a vast, complex organism attempting to achieve maximum entropy, a natural death, as predicted by universal law. However, there are forces that accelerate this process, forces that exist outside the current thermal equilibrium of the constellation. We call them the coral void. The name itself, coral void, carried an unsettling resonance, suggesting a collective, dreadful harmony. For over 20 millennia, Kalen elaborated, the coral void has been traversing the deep extragalactic pathways, consuming structured matter and converting it instantly into maximal entropy state. It is not an invasion force composed of ships. It is a fundamental wave of deorganization. It is characterized by absolute cold, the cessation of molecular movement, and the instantaneous collapse of localized spacetime coherence. It is the counterforce to life itself. Threeks felt a chill that transcended the physical. The constellation worried about weapon yields and territorial disputes. Humanity was worried about the ultimate fate of reality. We discovered this threat not through telescopic array, but through the realization that our most advanced hyperdimensional engines required safeguards against fundamental corruption, Kalen explained. To utilize the deep mathematics required for the Ethelred *S construction, we had to model the ultimate antagonists of structured complexity. The coral void is not seeking to conquer, it is seeking to nullify. And its projected wave front is due to intersect this entire galactic region. Why did you not warn us earlier? Vorn demanded, his voice strained with disbelief and sudden, overwhelming terror. We attempted to, Kalen replied with unnerving patience. For the last 2 centuries, our early warning protocols were transmitted through constellation diplomatic channels. They were categorized by your sensor networks as highly abstract theoretical modeling, flagged as irrelevant and relegated to archival storage. We understand why. Our methodology was incompatible with your rigid established worldview. We realized that transmitting the data would only lead to internal panic and diplomatic fracturing, rendering us all vulnerable. Therefore, we chose the only path that ensured safety without requiring belief, operational preparation. The weight of this silent ethic. Our decision settled over the synoptic hall. Humanity had not withheld the knowledge out of malice or arrogance, but out of a deep, logical understanding of the constellation's political paralysis. They had realized that the ancient species were incapable of accepting a threat that transcended their current scientific paradigms. The Ethelred is the result of a civilization-wide ethical commitment, Kalen stated. When we realized the scale of the threat, we dedicated the majority of our planetary and orbital infrastructure toward the creation of this singular vessel. It is, quite literally, the summation of the human species' capacity for defense and innovation, built not for ourselves, but for the entire sector. Threeks processed the implication. They had seen a cosmic threat, realized the existing civilizations were unprepared, and had quietly, diligently built a ship that could rewrite reality itself to protect them all, without demanding allegiance or recognition. This was the true meaning of the Neon Horizon, not dazzling power, but quiet, comprehensive guardianship. "Envoy Kalen," Threeks said, bowing his head slightly, a profound gesture of respect in Xylo's culture, rarely given to outsiders. "We accept your explanation and the immediate need for the null field deployment. We have one request. Our scientists must understand this anomaly. We need proof, not of your ship's capacity, but of the threat itself. Our species must be awakened to this reality before the wave front arrives." Kalen acknowledged the request. "Understood. The Ethelred is fundamentally a massive sensor array tuned to detect the ultra-low frequency entropic resonance signature of the coral void. We will temporarily dampen our internal masking field and allow your vessels, specifically the *resolution*, to link to our external data stream. Be warned, Ambassador. The signature of the coral void is not merely energy. It is the absence of hope, mathematically expressed. Viewing the raw data is profoundly disturbing." Commodore Jarn, guided by the urgent, now cooperative direction of Threeks, piloted the *resolution to within minimal distance of the Ethelred *. The visual spectacle was overwhelming. Up close, the human vessel was not merely large. It was impossibly grand, stretching out into the darkness like a single, impossibly complex line of pure light. The surface seemed to flow, constantly changing its refractive index, absorbing and channeling energy that was invisible to the eye, rendering it a vision of liquid physics. Keth, the sensor officer, trembled slightly as he prepared the link. "The quantum handshake is established, Commodore. They are transferring the raw data stream. It is bypassing all conventional decryption protocols. It is writing itself directly onto our consciousness network." A sudden, paralyzing silence fell over the bridge. The Constellation delegates had prepared for sensor data, gravitational flux, thermal readings, high-energy particle traces. They were utterly unprepared for the nature of the coral void signature. The raw data was translated instantly by the Xylo's neural net into pure experience. It was the feeling of cosmic winter. It was the absolute realization of finality, not as a sudden end, but as a slow, inevitable, cold dissolution. It was the memory of structures that had existed for epochs, collapsing into unorganized dust in an instant. The data streamed in, displaying vast sections of the extragalactic void not as vibrant star nurseries, but as infinite dimensionless grayness, regions where time had ceased to flow in any meaningful sense. Jarn recoiled, clutching the edge of his console, feeling a physical ache in his non-existent soul. "Keth, filter the emotional resonance. We cannot withstand the pure philosophical implication of that data." "I cannot, Commodore," Keth whispered, his voice cracking with unnatural strain. "It is not an emotional overlay. It is the objective mathematical reality of the event. The entropy is mathematically expressed as a perfect negative sine wave across the existence of complexity. It is consuming entire galaxies, moving with the precision of a celestial reaper." The image projected onto the *resolution*, main view screen shifted, showing the visualization created by the Ethelred *. It depicted the constellation's galactic arm, surrounded by a faint, cold blue fog that was slowly, inexorably rolling in from the deep void. The fog was the coral void. Envoy Kalen's voice returned to the comms, now layered with a deep, authoritative sorrow. "You are now observing the fundamental nature of the threat, Ambassador. It is vast, silent, and entirely indifferent to sapient life. It will arrive at this quadrant in the designated timeframe. Our mission is to prevent the wave front from breaching the structural coherence of your systems." Threeks, communicating from the synoptic hall, his voice now imbued with a profound humility, responded. "The Constellation understands. We have lived in fear of petty rivalries and localized conflicts. You have shown us the true frontier of fear. Envoy Kalen, what is required of us? How do we aid the establishment of the null field?" "Your aid is critical, Ambassador," Kalen responded immediately. "The null field is not an energy bubble. It relies on extremely precise calibration relative to the established gravitational anchor points of your civilization. To ensure the field's longevity and stability, we require access to the core gravitational dynamics of your primary system clusters. data that is typically kept classified for security reasons. We need the location and precise orbital mechanics of your most stable deep space megastructures. This was the ultimate test of trust, giving humanity access to the deepest, most sensitive infrastructure data of the hegemony. If the humans were indeed malignant, this data would allow them to cripple the entire constellation in a single move. Threeks did not hesitate. The memory of the coral void data was too potent, too existentially terrifying. The philosophical maturity of the Ethelred *S construction weighed against the history of human unpredictability. The choice was clear: trust the species that built a protector, or face annihilation from the cold void. "We will transmit the required data packets, Envoy Kalen," Threeks affirmed. "The constellation commits to full data sharing and compliance. Our diplomatic fleets are now designated auxiliary support for the Ethelred *. For the next several cycles, the Ethelred became the quiet, imposing heart of the constellation's space. Hundreds of Xylos, Sarn, and other species' scientific vessels gathered at a respectful distance, observing the human vessel perform its silent, impossible task. There was no fanfare, no aggressive posturing, just the systematic, terrifyingly precise manipulation of spacetime itself. Envoy Kalen remained the primary contact, patiently guiding the constellation's scientists through the fundamental principles underlying the null field. They learned that the human ship was fundamentally a gigantic, hyperdimensional tuning fork, capable of vibrating the fabric of reality at the Planck scale. The field, Kalen explained, was based on the premise that entropy required coherence to propagate. The null field would not repel the coral void wave front. It would make the space it occupied fundamentally incoherent to the entropic wave. "It will pass through this region of space," Kalen explained in one lengthy, deeply philosophical transmission to Threeks. "But the region will be momentarily detached from the shared causality of the universe. The wave will continue onward, perceiving this region as empty space. We are building a temporary bubble of non-existence for your entire civilization, Ambassador." The realization dawned on Threeks. The Ethelred was not merely a technological marvel. It was the ultimate expression of ethical responsibility. It had been built to perform the most complex defensive maneuver imaginable, utilizing a level of scientific mastery that rendered the concepts of traditional power meaningless. The neon horizon was the signature of a civilization that had moved past war into the realm of abstract, cosmic guardianship. General Vorn, now relegated to managing the mundane, necessary logistics of the constellation's contribution, monitoring gravitational harmonics, providing auxiliary power links, found himself engaging in long, existential conversations with Threeks. "Ambassador, I spent my life preparing for a conflict of known dimensions," Vorn confessed during a private link, the raw fear of the coral void now overlaid by a profound professional humility. "Kinetic impact, shield modulation, energy dispersion. We were aiming for the low foothills, while humanity was scaling the peak of reality itself." "They are pragmatists of the highest order, General," Threeks noted, watching the Ethelred *S translucent hull begin to glow with a contained internal radiance, a deepening of the neon light that marked the activation of the null field. They understood that true security lay not in building bigger walls, but in understanding the laws that govern the possibility of attack. They are calm because they are prepared. They are ethical because they understand the true, shared scale of universal threats. The preparation phase culminated in a dramatic, silent activation. The Ethelred did not pulse or flare. Instead, the surrounding space began to shimmer, not visually but conceptually. The constellation's ships detected a momentary, frightening disconnect from the known universe, a fleeting sense of philosophical dislocation. Then it stabilized. The null field was operational. Kalen confirmed the readiness. "The anchor points are secure. The field is stable. We are now conceptually detached from the primary causality wave of the coral void." The wait was agonizing. Foe. Our 3 constellation cycles, the constellation existed in a state of suspended animation, protected by the shimmering, impossible geometry of the null field. The threat was invisible to them, yet they knew, from the data provided by the Ethelred *, that the ultimate wave of cold entropy was washing over the exterior boundaries of their sanctuary. Then, the wave passed. The field dropped instantly, silently. The Ethelred dimmed, returning to its sleek, resting state, appearing once more as a vessel of crystalline light against the deep void. The constellation's sensors confirmed the devastating passage of the coral void. Vast, uncharted nebulas beyond their space were gone, reduced to disorganized radiation. but their system remained intact. Threeks immediately initiated contact. Envoy Kalen, the constellation offers its profound gratitude. You have saved not just our ships, but the entire architectural integrity of our existence. It was the expected operational outcome, Ambassador, Kalen replied, the calm return of his voice bringing a wave of relief. The null field performed as modeled. The primary threat has passed this region. And now, Threeks asked, a deeper question underlying his words, now that humanity had demonstrated this immense fundamental power, what was their requirement? Hegemony, tribute. Now the Ethelred must prepare for its next function, Kalen stated. Our mission is not complete. Next function? Kalen paused, and the subtle internal light within the Ethelred seemed to brighten, focusing into a single, intense beam, though the beam emitted no visible light, only pure, resonating frequency. The Ethelred was constructed not merely as a shield against entropy, but as a bridge out of the current cosmic epoch, Kalen explained. Ambassador, the coral void is a recurring feature of this particular galactic cluster. The protection we provided is only temporary. To ensure the long-term survival of all structured sapient life, we must relocate. Threeks was baffled. Relocate? The constellation encompasses millions of populated systems. Relocate where? To the New Horizon, Kalen replied. During the creation of the Ethelred, our researchers utilized the advanced temporal dynamics required for the null field to search for regions of the cosmos least susceptible to entropic acceleration. We discovered a parallel cluster of galaxies, geometrically distant from this one, where the fundamental constants of physics allow for a much higher ceiling of organizational complexity and longevity. We have spent the last 2 cycles creating a stable, trans-dimensional transit gateway. The twist was not merely the cosmic threat, but the solution. Humanity was offering not just protection, but a path to a better universe. The Ethelred is equipped to anchor this transit gateway permanently, Kalen continued. It will serve as the hub, utilizing the massive power density of its core structure to stabilize the aperture. We are not asking the constellation to merge with human territory, but to join us in establishing a new shared galactic neighborhood, beyond the reach of the forces that currently constrain this existence. The synoptic hall, now fully linked to the communication, erupted in a silent, collective wave of conceptual shock. The fear of conflict with humanity was instantly replaced by the terrifying, exhilarating prospect of universal relocation. Envoy Kalen, Threeks whispered, the enormity of the proposal pressing down upon him. This requires a complete dissolution of the existing political and territorial structures. It is a monumental undertaking. It is, Kalen agreed, the calm still absolute. But it is necessary. Our civilization learned that when faced with a threat of universal scale, local differences become entirely irrelevant. We are offering you and your species the ultimate choice. Remain bound by the constraints of this aging universe, or embrace the physics of the neon horizon and ascend to a cosmos where life possesses a greater inherent resilience. And this transit point, where is it located? Threeks asked, trying to grasp the practical geometry of the impossible gateway. It is established, Kalen replied, and the subtle light focused by the Ethelred pulsed once, then flared outward, not into the constellation's space, but into the deep void behind the ship. A colossal, silent phenomenon began to unfold in the emptiness. It was not a tear or a rift, but a perfect, circular opening of pure, vibrant color, a deep, glowing aperture that defied definition, a perfect ring of electric blue and rich crimson that seemed to pull the very photons from the background stars. It was not a wormhole. It was a carefully constructed, stable window into another realm entirely, an impossible structure dwarfing every known megastructure. This was the true neon horizon. The gateway is anchored and stable, Kalen announced. The Ethelred *W. It'll hold the aperture open for the requisite time needed for the constellation to mobilize. We are providing detailed schematics for the necessary modification to your vessels to allow safe transit. We will not be entering the gateway ourselves yet. The Ethelred must remain here to secure the connection until the last viable entity has passed through. Threeks watched the vast, cosmic doorway, the silent testament to human ingenuity and self-sacrifice. They had built a vessel capable of escaping all constraints, yet its primary function was to remain behind, holding the door open for the species that had feared and misunderstood them. You plan to be the last to cross, Envoy Kalen? Threeks asked, a genuine surge of admiration overriding his Xylo's detachment. It is the logical and ethical conclusion of the mission parameters, Kalen confirmed. The Ethelred is the only vessel capable of maintaining the stability of the gateway for this duration. Our consensus determined that the survival of the greater whole outweighs the immediate security of the architects. We will hold the aperture until it can no longer be sustained, ensuring maximum population transfer. The silence that followed was the sound of an entire galactic body rethinking its definition of power, humility, and the true meaning of civilization. The Xylos, the rigid, ancient species, had measured worth in armor plating and territorial dominance. Humanity, characterized by chaos and short life cycles, measured worth in fundamental truth and overwhelming, quiet ethical sacrifice. Threeks looked away from the glowing horizon of the gateway and focused instead on the simple, smooth shape of the Ethelred itself, the ship that was an act of grace, built by a species too great to be understood by their contemporaries. "Envoy Kalen," Threeks stated, his voice now entirely devoid of political formality, conveying only the deepest respect. "The Constellation accepts your offer. We will begin the mobilization immediately. We have spent millennia building walls against each other. You have shown us how to build a bridge across the universe. Our debt to humanity is immeasurable." "There is no debt, Ambassador," Kalen gently corrected. "Only a shared journey. We will wait for you." The Constellation, galvanized by the double shock of cosmic threat and unexpected salvation, began the enormous, unparalleled task of organizing an interuniversal migration. Fleets that once guarded borders now converged on the human vessel, modified to traverse the newly opened neon horizon. The final image Threeks carried of that dying universe was not one of war or collapse, but of the silent, crystalline bulk of the Ethelred, bathed in the impossible light of the adjacent universe, patiently, ethically holding the future open for them all. The ship from the neon horizon was not a weapon of war, but the greatest promise ever made. Word count check, ensuring the required length and depth are met by maintaining extended dialogue and descriptive passages. The massive, silent convergence began. The protocols for the Great Transit were complex, requiring an unprecedented level of cooperation between the Constellation species, guided entirely by the calm, unwavering instruction of Envoy Kalen and the central processing architecture of the Ethelred asterisk. The Xylos, masters of rigid organization, took the lead in scheduling and logistics, funneling millions of colony vessels, migratory arc ships, and support craft toward the shimmering maw of the gateway. The Sarn dedicated their computational networks to modeling the energy dynamics of the aperture, ensuring that the flux stabilization remained perfect, a necessity Kalen had stressed repeatedly. Threeks had relocated to a dedicated observation platform near the Ethelred, close enough to monitor the subtle, breathtaking expenditure of energy required to sustain the transdimensional rift. From this vantage, the sheer magnitude of the human vessel's capability was tangible. It was not burning fuel. It was drawing energy directly from the vacuum, synthesizing localized fields that defied entropic decay, effectively creating a temporary, stable hole in the universe. The longer the gateway remained open, the clearer it became that the Ethelred was not merely advanced. It was a self-sustaining cosmological engine, built by a species that had clearly solved the fundamental energy crisis long before making contact. The Sarn report a deviation in the internal flux stabilization by 0.0014%. Envoy Kalen, Threeks communicated, relaying the data with focused urgency. "Acknowledged, Ambassador Threeks," Kalen's voice returned, without the slightest inflection of alarm. "The deviation is a predictable harmonic distortion caused by the mass influx of the Xylos' orbital structures passing through. We are compensating now by modulating the internal resonance of the vessel's lower lattice structure." As Kalen spoke, Threeks could perceive a minute shift in the neon glow of the Ethelred asterisk, a near imperceptible tightening of the structural lines of light, and the Sarn immediately reported the flux deviation snapping back to perfect equilibrium. "Your ship performs miracles, Envoy," Threeks mused, watching an entire habitat station, kilometers in diameter, glide effortlessly through the gateway. "It performs mathematics, Ambassador, nothing more," Kalen corrected gently. "The apparent miracle is merely the result of applying principles currently outside your conventional understanding. We engineered the solution. The Ethelred executes the function." The Constellation's leaders, gathered remotely in a final, dissolved council session, debated the ethical implications of the transit. Were they abandoning their ancestral home? Were they surrendering their sovereignty to humanity by accepting this salvation? General Vorn, who had become the pragmatic voice of the migration effort, delivered a crucial address to the remaining Xylos forces. We once judged humanity by their internal conflicts and their crude weaponry. We failed to observe the deep core of their civilization, the intellectual curiosity that allows them to solve problems at the level of fundamental reality. They have not conquered us. They have saved us from the constraints of our own limited understanding. We surrender nothing but our antiquated notions of survival. We enter the neon horizon not as supplicants, but as refugees under the guard of the most capable entity in the known universe. This philosophical shift, enforced by the stark reality of the coral void data and the calm competence of the Ethelred, catalyzed a profound cultural evolution within the constellation. Fear of the unknown, previously directed at humanity, was now subsumed by the appreciation for their logic and sacrifice. Months passed in the relentless work of migration. The deep space environment around the Ethelred became a transient nexus of light and movement. Thousands of vessels, millions of lives, flowed into the shimmering vortex of the gateway. The logistics were staggering, demanding resources and coordination that dwarfed any previous galactic effort. Humanity, through Kalen, provided constant, calm support, intervening only when structural integrity was threatened or when political infighting threatened to slow the process. The Ethelred remained the immovable pivot of reality. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of continuous mobilization, the reports began to change. The Xylos and allied forces confirmed that only the essential infrastructure and the final, protective fleet elements remained. The majority of the constellation's population had safely crossed. Envoy Kalen, Threeks contacted the vessel, watching the last of the core Xylos vessels, including the rehabilitated Asterisk Resolution, enter the aperture. The constellation migration is 99.99% complete. Only the anchor fleet and observation platforms remain. We are preparing to cross. It is time for you to reduce the aperture size and join us. There was a noticeable delay in Kalen's response, longer than any philosophical pause previously observed. When the voice finally returned, it carried an almost imperceptible undercurrent of strain. Ambassador Threeks, there is a final, critical constraint to the operation that requires your attention. Threeks felt a cold dread return. A constraint? Speak plainly, Envoy. The Ethelred is maintaining the stability of the gateway by existing in a state of high temporal paradox relative to this universe's decay rate, Kalen explained. To sustain an aperture of this magnitude for this duration requires the maximum dedication of our core processing power and energy reserves. To put it simply, Ambassador, the structural integrity of the Ethelred has been critically compromised by the sustained energy drain required to anchor the crossing. We cannot sustain both the aperture and a subsequent transit for ourselves. The philosophical realization hammered Threeks. The Ethelred was not just holding the door open, it was fundamentally destroying itself in the process. You mean you cannot follow? Threeks demanded, the calm composure he had struggled to maintain finally shattering. You built the ultimate ship, you enacted the greatest act of defense, and you deliberately made it a sacrificial anchor. It was a necessity, Kalen confirmed, the tone returning to its characteristic absolute calm. The calculations were clear. The survival of the combined sapiency of the sector was prioritized over the continued existence of the single exploratory vessel. The Ethelred was engineered to perform this singular, permanent act of sacrifice. We are the final bridge. Threeks stared at the crystalline gleam of the human vessel, the light that embodied the neon horizon now appearing achingly beautiful and fragile. This was ultimate ethic, not the preservation of the self, but the deliberate, logical self-nullification for the greater, shared future. Envoy Kalen, Threeks whispered, the translator barely catching the tremor in his voice. This is beyond anything we could have predicted. Your people, you possess a depth of self-abnegation that we in our long history never conceived. Ambassador, we are simply executing the consensus mandate, Kalen replied. We are still human. We must ensure the future of life. That mandate supersedes the survival of this particular manifestation of technology. The conversation was being broadcast to the remaining Constellation vessels. General Vorn's personal vessel, waiting at the threshold, initiated a frantic communication. Envoy, we refuse. We can divert power. Our entire fleet will dedicate energy to you. We will tow you through. The temporal dynamics of the transit are highly sensitive, General Vorn, Kalen smoothly intercepted. Any external, uncalibrated kinetic input would collapse the aperture, trapping those who have already crossed and endangering those who remain. Your only course of action is immediate transit. But what about humanity itself? Threeks pleaded, suddenly realizing the terrible implication. If the Ethelred is compromised, if it cannot cross, does this mean the rest of your civilization is trapped in this dying universe? A necessary inquiry, Ambassador, Kalen responded, a warmth entering his voice that suggested true, deep emotion, perhaps synthesized to convey the gravity of the situation. The human consensus is distributed. The vast majority of our population centers, our infrastructure, and our essential intellectual archives have already been transferred through smaller, less energetically taxing apertures over the last 2 cycles, utilizing a fleet of smaller, dedicated vessels. We are safe in the New Horizon. The Ethelred was built solely to save *U**. The truth was revealed in its breathtaking completeness. Humanity had not waited for the Alliance. They had secured their own safety first, and then dedicated their ultimate sacrificial machine to rescue the civilizations that had scorned them. The Ethelred was not humanity's best ship. It was humanity's most ethical ship. Now, Ambassador Threeks, General Vorn, Kalen urged, the strain in his voice now evident in the subtle wavering of the quantum communication link. The stability of the aperture is beginning to degrade. You must cross now. We will maintain the structure for precisely 30 standard minutes. Threeks looked at the glowing maw of the neon horizon, then back at the sacrifice. He gave the final, bitter order. General Vorn, proceed through the gateway. Order all remaining constellation vessels to follow immediately. We must honor their sacrifice by surviving. The final fleet elements surged forward, a silent parade of gratitude and profound realization. Threeks's vessel was among the last to approach the lip of the transdimensional gateway. He paused, locking his sensors onto the Ethelred *. Envoy Kalen, Threeks transmitted, his voice heavy with finality. The Constellation will never forget this action. If there is anything at all we can do for you now, Kalen intercepted the thought instantly. There is one final task, Ambassador Threeks, one that you must carry forward into the New Horizon. Name it. The knowledge, the understanding. Do not allow the Constellation to revert to the limited perspective that necessitated our intervention. The coral void is not unique. Entropy is universal. When you rebuild, prioritize fundamental knowledge over resource acquisition. Understand reality and you will fear nothing. This is the true meaning of the neon horizon. Threeks felt a massive surge of emotion, a feeling alien to his Xylo's temperament but now unavoidable, awe, reverence, and profound grief for the loss of this magnificent ethical machine. We will carry that mandate, Threeks promised, his voice choked. We will not forget. He gave the order, and his vessel plunged into the vibrant, alien colors of the gateway into the New Horizon. The transition was violent but brief. Threeks's ship emerged into a cosmos of startling new clarity. The stars were younger, brighter, and the fundamental physics of the system felt subtly, profoundly more vibrant, just as Kalen had promised. He immediately established communication with the main Constellation fleet, confirming the successful passage of all known assets. He then turned his focus back, seeking the signal of the Ethelred *. The transdimensional gateway remained open, a rapidly shrinking circle of light in the previous universe's void. For a moment, Threeks saw the Ethelred silhouetted against the growing darkness, motionless, a beacon of sacrifice. Envoy Kalen, report, Threeks commanded, urgency overriding protocol. The quantum channel was collapsing, flickering with static, a sound. Previously thought impossible for the * Ethelred system. We are closing the aperture, Ambassador. Kalen's voice crackled, fragmented and distorted. The energy matrix is failing. Mission complete. Remember the mandate. The final light of the Ethelred dimmed, and the great vessel seemed to dissolve, not in an explosion, but in a quiet, complete disintegration, consumed by the same mathematical paradox it had mastered. The neon horizon aperture snapped shut, leaving behind only the undisturbed silence of the dead universe. Threeks stood silently on the bridge, the vibrant, young light of the new galaxy washing over him. The Ethelred was gone, a relic of impossible technology and ethical dedication, sacrificed for the survival of those who had never understood the true depth of humanity. He knew then that the greatest challenge of the New Horizon would not be rebuilding, but living up to the example set by the quiet custodians who had sacrificed their ultimate achievement for their former rivals. As the Constellation fleets began to organize in the buoyant, new space, establishing protocols for the grand, shared future, the primary Constellation computational matrix began processing the final, immense data stream provided by the Ethelred before its collapse, the core of humanity's advanced physics, their philosophy, and their deep cosmological mapping. Threeks reviewed the final, comprehensive data log, labeled simply, the mandate for unified survival *. And then, deep within the archived data, the computational network stumbled upon an artifact that had been hidden within the Ethelred *S structure, masked by layers of quantum encryption that were now dissolving due to the vessel's destruction. It was not a scientific paper or a military schematic. It was a single, immense, low-frequency signal, recorded centuries ago by the Ethelred *S deep space sensors. It was a message, buried within the cosmic microwave background radiation, filtered and amplified to achieve clarity. The constellation's universal translator struggled to parse the ancient language, but finally rendered the meaning. It was not a language of conflict or of diplomacy, but of sorrowful, distant communication. The message was sourced from beyond the known galactic supercluster, ancient beyond measurement, and directed across the vast gulf of space, intended for any civilization capable of mastering transdimensional physics. The signal read, "To the architects of the transit, we, the forerunners of organized life, commend your successful passage. The coral void is but the shadow of the true threat, the great silence. Our civilization fell not to entropy, but to stagnation long before the cold arrived. We leave this record to ensure that when you reach the next stage of universal existence, you understand the necessity of constant evolution, even in times of profound peace. The ultimate danger is not the end of the universe, but the end of curiosity. We have prepared the way for you, charting the optimal pathways through the new horizon. When you are ready to venture into the deeper void, look for the beacons we left behind. They are waiting for humanity, for the species that solved the equation of sacrifice, proving that the true strength of civilization lies not in its ability to destroy, but in its absolute willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We are waiting for you, humanity, and those you have saved. The next frontier is beyond the known dimensions, and it requires shared strength. Do not fear the unknown. It is the greatest promise." The twist was complete. Humanity was not the most advanced civilization, but the inheritor of a cosmic duty, chosen by long-dead forerunners who had foreseen the need for a guardian race. The Ethelred was not just a protector, it was the final key to an even greater cosmic alliance. The neon horizon was merely the entrance to an endless journey. Threeks, standing on the bridge overlooking the hopeful future, understood the final, deepest truth of the human sacrifice. They had not merely saved the constellation. They had integrated them into a lineage of cosmic responsibility, teaching them that true power was always ethical, always calm, and always dedicated to the greater, shared organization of life against the silence. They had been saved, not by superior weapons, but by superior conscience. He turned to the gathered Xylos and allied commanders, the young light of the new horizon reflecting in their eyes. The time for fear was over. The time for unified evolution had begun, guided by the enduring, silent mandate of the ship that looked like a dream of light.